Story 1. The Night Manager. I've been working the night shift at the Desert Rose Inn for going on 12 years now. You see all kinds of weird stuff when you're manning the front desk from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., but what happened last October still keeps me up during the day when I'm supposed to be sleeping. It was a Tuesday night, real quiet. We only had maybe 6 rooms occupied out of 42. The Desert Rose sits right off Highway 94, about 30 miles east of Phoenix. Nothing but scrub brush and Joshua trees for miles in every direction. Perfect place for people who want to disappear for a while, if you catch my meaning. Around 2:30 in the morning, I'm reading this paperback western when the front door chimes. I look up and there's this man standing there. Tall, maybe 6'4", wearing a black suit that looked expensive. Real expensive. The kind of suit you don't see much of in a place like this. What struck me first wasn't the suit though. It was how quiet he was. Most people, when they walk into a hotel lobby, their shoes make some kind of noise on the tile. This guy moved like he was floating, and his skin, man, it was pale. Not just white pale, but almost translucent, like you could see the veins underneath if you looked hard enough. "I need a room," he says. His voice was weird too. Real monotone, like he was reading from a script. "Sure thing," I tell him, pulling out the registration book. "How many nights?" "1." I'm waiting for him to elaborate, maybe ask about rates or amenities, but he just stands there staring at me. His eyes were the strangest part. They were blue, but not a normal blue. More like the color of ice when you shine a flashlight through it. "Okay, that'll be $59 for the night. I'll need to see some ID and a credit card." He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a wallet. Everything about his movements was too smooth, too deliberate, like he was thinking about each motion before he made it. The ID he hands me says his name is John Smith. The address is some street in Tucson, but the photo doesn't look quite right. It's him, but something about the proportions seemed off. The credit card goes through fine. I give him the key to room 207, second floor, facing the desert. "Checkout is 11 a.m., I tell him. "Continental breakfast starts at 6 if you're interested." He takes the key without saying thanks and heads for the elevator. That's when I notice he's not carrying any luggage. Not even a small bag. I almost call out to ask if he needs help with anything from his car. But when I look out the front windows, I don't see a car. The parking lot is empty except for the 6 vehicles belonging to our other guests. I figure maybe he walked from the truck stop about a mile up the road. Wouldn't be the first time someone hoofed it over here after their ride broke down. About an hour later, I'm doing my rounds, checking that all the doors are locked and the ice machines are working. When I get to the second floor, I notice there's no light coming from under the door of room 207. Most people leave the TV on or at least have a lamp going, but his room is completely dark. I'm about to head back downstairs when I hear this sound. It's hard to describe. Kind of like a low humming, but with this weird vibration to it. It seems to be coming from his room, but also from everywhere at once. The sound makes my teeth ache and gives me this dizzy feeling. I stand there listening for maybe 30 seconds before it stops. Complete silence after that. Not even the usual sounds you get in a hotel at night. No air conditioning cycling, no ice makers dropping cubes, no traffic from the highway. Just dead quiet. The next morning, around 6:15, I'm getting ready for the day shift guy to come in when I remember the continental breakfast. I set it up in the little dining area off the lobby. Coffee, juice, cereal, bagels, the usual stuff. By 7 a.m., a few of our guests have come down to grab something to eat, but no sign of the guy in 207. Day shift arrives and I give him the rundown. Quiet night, 6 guests, nothing unusual. I don't mention the humming sound. Seems silly in the daylight. I'm walking to my car when I look up at the second floor. The curtains in room 207 are wide open, and I can see straight through to the back wall. The room looks completely empty. Not just no person, but no furniture either. Like someone had cleaned it out completely. But that's impossible. All our rooms have the same setup. Bed, dresser, desk, chair, TV mounted on the wall. Heavy stuff that would take hours to move. I go back inside and ask Jerry, the day guy, if housekeeping had been scheduled to do anything special with 207. "Nope," he says. "Why?" I tell him it looks empty from outside. He gives me this look like maybe I need more sleep, which I probably do. We take the elevator up to check. Jerry uses his master key and we open the door. The room is completely normal. Bed made, furniture in place, everything exactly like it should be. But the weird thing is, it doesn't look like anyone stayed there. The bed is made too perfectly, like housekeeping had been through, but housekeeping doesn't come in until 10 a.m. "Looks like your guy checked out early," Jerry says. But that doesn't make sense either. The key was still in the drop box at the front desk, and I would have heard the elevator or the stairs if he'd left during my shift. I checked the registration book. John Smith, room 207, one night. But when I look at the credit card receipt, it's blank. Not declined or anything, just blank, like the transaction never happened. Jerry thinks I'm losing it, says I probably dreamed the whole thing. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. The really weird part came about a week later. I'm talking to Maria, one of our housekeepers, and she mentioned something strange. Says room 207 has been acting up. The TV turns on by itself, always tuned to static. The air conditioning runs constantly, but the room stays cold. Really cold, like winter cold. She also says sometimes when she's cleaning in there, she gets this feeling like someone's watching her. But when she turns around, there's nobody there. We had the maintenance guy check everything. TV, thermostat, wiring, everything tests normal. But the problems keep happening, only in that room. I've been thinking about that night a lot. The more I think about it, the more details come back that didn't seem important at the time. Like how the guy's suit never wrinkled even after he'd been sitting in the lobby chair. Or how he never blinked. Not once during our entire conversation. And that humming sound, I've heard it twice more since then. Always around 2:30 in the morning, always coming from room 207. Even when the room is empty. Last month, I finally worked up the nerve to ask the owner about the history of the hotel. Turns out the Desert Rose was built in 1978 on land that used to be part of a much larger ranch. The rancher sold it to the developers after some kind of incident. Wouldn't say what kind of incident, just that he wanted nothing more to do with the property. I did some digging at the county records office. Found an old newspaper article from 1976 about strange lights being reported in the area. Multiple witnesses described seeing bright objects moving in patterns that didn't match any known aircraft. The sightings went on for several months before suddenly stopping. The article mentioned that the ranch owner, a guy named William Hendricks, had reported unusual activity on his property. Livestock behaving strangely, electronic equipment malfunctioning, that sort of thing. But when reporters tried to follow up, Hendricks refused to talk about it. I'm not saying I believe in little green men or anything like that. But I know what I experienced that night, and I know that room 207 has never been quite right since then. The Desert Rose Inn sits in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by empty desert. If someone wanted to visit our world without being noticed, it would be a pretty good place to stop for the night. Quiet, isolated, and staffed by people who mind their own business. I still work the night shift. Still see strange things from time to time, but nothing quite like that October night when John Smith checked into room 207. Sometimes when it's really quiet and I'm doing my rounds, I'll stop by that room and listen. Most of the time, there's nothing. But occasionally, just occasionally, I'll hear that humming sound again. Low and vibrating and completely unlike anything else. When that happens, I don't investigate. I just go back to the front desk and wait for morning. Story 2. The business trip. Okay, so this is going to sound totally insane, but I swear on my grandmother's grave this actually happened. I'm 24, work in marketing for a tech company in Denver, and I travel a lot for work, like allow it. I've stayed in probably 200 different hotels over the past 3 years. This was back in March. I was driving to Salt Lake City for a conference, and my flight got canceled due to weather. Company policy says I can rent a car and drive if it's under 8 hours, so that's what I did. Problem was, I left Denver at like 4 p.m. and hit this massive snowstorm around Grand Junction. By the time I got through the worst of it, it was almost midnight and I was exhausted. I'm not stupid enough to drive mountain roads in a blizzard when I can barely keep my eyes open, so I started looking for a place to crash. Most of the hotels along I-70 were booked solid because of all the flight cancellations, but I finally found this place called Mountain View Lodge. It was one of those old-school motor lodges, probably built in the 60s, with rooms that opened directly to the parking lot. Not exactly 4-star accommodations, but whatever, I just needed somewhere to sleep. The guy at the front desk was probably in his 50s, super friendly, kind of reminded me of my dad. He's all apologetic about only having one room left, says it's their specialty suite, but he'll give it to me for the regular rate since I'm stranded. I'm like, great, whatever, just give me a key. I'm so tired I probably would have slept in my car if I had to. The room is at the far end of the building, room 26. When I pull up in front of it, I notice the parking lot is weirdly empty for a place that's supposedly booked up. But I figure maybe most people are staying multiple nights and their cars are parked elsewhere or something. Inside, the room is actually pretty nice. Way nicer than I expected from the outside. Everything looks recently renovated. New carpet, fresh paint, modern furniture. The bed is huge, like California king size, with really high thread count sheets. There's even a mini fridge stocked with expensive bottled water and fancy snacks. I'm thinking this is awesome. Maybe my luck is finally turning around. I take a quick shower, brush my teeth, and crash. I'm out within like 5 minutes of my head hitting the pillow. Here's where it gets weird. I wake up and it's still dark, but something feels off. I check my phone and it says 3:17 a.m. I've been asleep for maybe 3 hours, but I feel completely rested, like I'd slept for 10 hours. That's not normal for me at all. Usually when I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm groggy and disoriented. But I'm wide awake, alert in a way that feels almost artificial. I'm lying there trying to figure out why I woke up when I hear voices outside. Not loud voices, but I can definitely hear people talking. Which is strange because when I checked in, the desk guy made it sound like I was lucky to get the last room. I get up and peek through the curtains. There are people in the parking lot. A lot of people. Maybe 20 or 30 of them, all standing around in small groups, just talking quietly. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. They're all wearing identical clothes. Not uniforms exactly, but everyone has on the same style of dark clothing. Simple, well-fitted, expensive looking. And they're all really tall and thin, like unusually tall. Even the women are probably close to 6 feet. At first I think maybe it's some kind of conference group, like a corporate retreat or something. But at 3 in the morning, and why are they just standing around in the parking lot? I watch for a few minutes and notice they're not really talking the way normal people talk. Their conversations seem too formal, too structured, like they're following a script or something. And nobody is laughing or gesturing or doing any of the little things people usually do when they're chatting. Then one of them turns and looks directly at my window. I jerk back from the curtains, but I'm pretty sure they saw me. The person who looked at me was a woman, I think, but her face was really pale and her features seemed too sharp, too angular. I wait a few minutes before looking again and they're all gone. The parking lot is completely empty. No cars, no people, nothing, like they just vanished. Now I'm freaked out. I check all the locks on the door and windows, close the curtains tight, and try to go back to sleep. But every little sound makes me jump. The heater cycling on, the ice machine down the hall, cars on the highway. Everything seems amplified. Around 5 a.m. I finally drift off again. When I wake up, it's 9:30 and sunlight is streaming through the curtains. I feel normal again, just regular tired like you'd expect after a weird night. I pack up my stuff and head to the front desk to check out. Different guy working now, younger, maybe early 30s. I mention the people in the parking lot to him, just casually, like, "Wow, you guys had a lot of activity last night." He gives me this blank look and says they didn't have any other guests. Says I was the only person who checked in yesterday and the hotel is usually pretty empty during the week in March. I'm like, that's impossible. I saw at least 30 people out there around 3 a.m. He just shrugs and says maybe it was people from the truck stop down the road. But that doesn't make sense either, because there was no truck stop. I'd driven past this area in daylight and there's nothing around for miles except the hotel. He processes my checkout and I get in my car to leave. As I'm pulling out of the parking lot, I look back at the hotel and notice something that makes my stomach drop. Room 26, the room I stayed in, has a sign on the door that says, "Out of order, do not disturb." But I just checked out of that room 5 minutes ago. It was working fine. I almost go back to ask about it. But honestly, I just want to get out of there. The whole place is giving me major creepy vibes. The drive to Salt Lake City takes about 4 more hours, and the whole time I'm trying to rationalize what happened. Maybe I was more tired than I thought and dreamed the whole thing. Maybe the altitude messed with my sleep patterns. Maybe there's a logical explanation for everything. But here's what really bothers me. When I got to the conference and checked into my hotel there, I looked at my phone to see how much battery I had left. It was at 97%, which makes no sense because I'd been using GPS for hours and my phone is usually dead by the end of a long day. I always charge my phone overnight when I'm traveling, but I specifically remember not plugging it in at the Mountain View Lodge because I couldn't find an outlet near the bed. So how was it almost fully charged? And another thing, I took a selfie in the hotel room before I went to sleep, just a stupid picture to send to my girlfriend showing how nice the room was. When I looked for it later, the photo wasn't on my phone, not deleted, just not there, like I never took it. I've stayed in a lot of hotels since then, but I always think about that night. I've even tried to find the Mountain View Lodge online to see if other people have had similar experiences, but I can't find any record of it. No website, no reviews, nothing. I drove that same road again about 6 months later for another work trip. I specifically looked for the hotel, but I couldn't find it. There's a gas station where I thought it should be, but no hotel. The gas station attendant said it had been there for 15 years and there'd never been a hotel in that area. Maybe I was more lost than I thought that night. Maybe I took a different route and ended up somewhere else entirely. But I remember the exit number, I remember the mile markers, I remember exactly where it was. Sometimes I wonder if I actually slept at all that night, or if something else happened that I can't remember. The whole experience felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. I still travel for work all the time, and I've never had anything like that happen again. But now I'm always careful to book hotels in advance, and I stick to the major chains. No more random motor lodges in the middle of nowhere. Whatever happened at the Mountain View Lodge, I don't want to experience it again. Story 3. The Family Vacation. You know how sometimes you remember things from when you were little, and you're not sure if they really happened or if you just dreamed them. This is one of those stories, except I know it really happened because my whole family was there and we all remember it differently, which somehow makes it even weirder. I was 8 years old and we were driving from our house in Columbus, Ohio to visit my aunt in Albuquerque. My mom, my dad, my little brother Kevin who was 5, and me. This was back in 1992 before GPS and cell phones and all that. You had to actually plan your route and hope you didn't get lost. We'd been driving for 2 days and we were somewhere in Kansas. I remember because it was so flat and boring and Kevin kept asking, "Are we there yet?" every 10 minutes. Dad was getting cranky and Mom was trying to keep the peace by making us play the license plate game. It was getting dark and we needed to find a place to stay for the night. We'd been looking for a hotel for like an hour, but everything we passed was either full or looked too sketchy for Mom's standards. She's really particular about where we stay when we travel. Finally, we see this sign for something called the Prairie Inn. It's one of those blue signs on the highway that tells you there's food and lodging at the next exit. The sign looked official enough, so Dad takes the exit. The hotel is about a mile off the highway, sitting by itself in the middle of nowhere. It's a 2-story building, kind of modern looking for the early 90s, with a big parking lot that's mostly empty. There are lights on in the lobby and a few of the rooms, so it looks open for business. Dad parks near the front entrance and tells us to wait in the car while he goes in to check on rooms. Through the big windows, I can see him talking to someone at the front desk, but I can't really make out the person he's talking to. The lobby is bright, but somehow the person behind the desk seems to be standing in a shadow. Dad comes back with 2 key cards and says they have adjoining rooms available. Mom asks about the rate and Dad says it's really reasonable, like way cheaper than the chain hotels we usually stay at. We grab our overnight bags and head inside. The lobby is nice, clean and modern with comfortable-looking furniture. There's a continental breakfast area and what looks like a small business center with a computer and printer. Everything seems normal. The person at the front desk is a woman, maybe in her 40s, with short blonde hair and a friendly smile. She welcomes us and asks if we need anything for the night. Her voice sounds normal, but there's something about her that makes me feel uncomfortable. I can't put my finger on what it is. Our rooms are on the 2nd floor, connected by a door in the wall. Mom and Dad take one room, Kevin and I get the other. The rooms are really nice, much nicer than I expected from the outside. New carpets, big comfortable beds, a TV with cable channels, and a bathroom that's spotless. Kevin and I are excited because we each get our own bed and there's a Nintendo hooked up to the TV. This is like the best hotel ever as far as we're concerned. We spend about an hour playing Super Mario Brothers before Mom tells us to get ready for bed. I brush my teeth and put on my pajamas, but I'm not really tired yet. I'm looking out the window at the parking lot when I notice something weird. There are more cars now than when we arrived, but I haven't seen any other guests. The parking lot was almost empty when we checked in, but now there are maybe 15 or 20 vehicles. I mentioned this to Kevin, but he's already half asleep. I keep watching out the window for a while, but I don't see anyone coming or going. Just cars sitting there in the parking lot. Around midnight, I wake up because I need to use the bathroom. Kevin is sound asleep in the other bed, snoring quietly. I get up and head for the bathroom, but as I'm walking past the window, I see something that makes me stop. There are people in the parking lot. A lot of people. They're standing around in small groups, but they're not talking or moving around like you'd expect. They're just standing there, perfectly still, like statues. I rub my eyes thinking maybe I'm still half asleep, but when I look again, they're still there. Maybe 30 or 40 people, all wearing dark clothing, all standing motionless in the parking lot. I want to wake up Kevin, but I'm afraid he'll make noise and wake up our parents. Instead, I just watch from the window. The people don't move for the longest time. They just stand there in these perfect little groups, facing different directions. Then, all at once, they start walking, not toward the hotel, but away from it, toward the edge of the parking lot where it meets the prairie. They move in this weird synchronized way, like they're all following the same invisible path. I watch until they disappear into the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. The whole thing probably took about 10 minutes, but it felt much longer. The next morning at breakfast, I try to tell my family what I saw, but nobody believes me. Dad says I was probably dreaming, Mom says it was probably just other hotel guests, and Kevin says I'm making it up to get attention. But here's the thing, when we go down to the continental breakfast, we're the only people there. The breakfast area is set up for maybe 50 people, with lots of tables and chairs, but it's completely empty except for us. I asked the lady at the front desk if they had a lot of guests last night, and she says no, just a few families like ours. But that doesn't make sense because I saw all those cars in the parking lot. Mom asks about checkout time and the lady says 11 a.m., but then she adds something weird. She says we're welcome to stay longer if we want, that they have special arrangements for families who need extra time. Dad says thanks, but we need to get back on the road. We pack up our stuff and load the car. As we're driving away, I look back at the hotel and count the cars in the parking lot. There are only 4, including ours. But I know what I saw the night before. There were way more cars than that. The rest of the drive to Albuquerque is normal. We get to my aunt's house and have a great vacation. But I keep thinking about that night at the Prairie Inn. Years later, when I'm in high school, I ask my parents about that trip. They remember staying at the hotel, but their memories are different from mine. Dad remembers the front desk person being a man, not a woman. Mom remembers the rooms being on the first floor, not the second. Kevin doesn't remember the Nintendo at all, which is weird because he was obsessed with video games at that age. He says he remembers being really tired and sleeping really well, better than he usually did in hotels. I've tried to find the Prairie Inn online, but I can't find any record of it. There are a few hotels in that area of Kansas, but none that match my memory of the place. It's like it just disappeared. Sometimes I wonder if we actually stayed there at all, or if something else happened that night that we can't remember properly. But I know what I saw from that hotel room window. Those people in the parking lot weren't normal hotel guests. They moved wrong, stood wrong, and disappeared wrong. I'm 30 now, married with kids of my own, but I still think about that night sometimes, especially when we're traveling and need to find a hotel in an unfamiliar area. I always check reviews online now, stick to places with lots of recent feedback from real guests. I never want to end up at another Prairie Inn, whatever that place really was. Story 4, The Trucker's Rest. Been driving truck for 37 years, seen just about everything there is to see on America's highways. Weird weather, strange people, places that don't make sense. But what happened to me at the Starlight Motor Court in Nevada still gives me the shivers, and that was 8 years ago. I was hauling a load of electronics from Los Angeles to Denver, running behind schedule because of construction delays in Barstow. My logbook said I had to take my mandatory rest break, and I was getting close to the legal limit for driving hours. Problem was, I was in the middle of nowhere on Highway 95, about 2 hours north of Las Vegas. Most truck stops in that area are packed solid on weekends, and this was a Friday night. I'd already tried 3 places and they were all full up. My dispatcher was breathing down my neck about the delivery schedule. But doubt regulations don't care about your schedule. When you hit your hours, you stop. I was starting to think I'd have to pull over at a rest area and sleep in my cab when I saw this sign for the Starlight Motor Court. Truck friendly, it said, with an arrow pointing east. I'd never heard of the place, but after 20 minutes of desert road, I found it. The Starlight was an old-fashioned motor lodge, probably built in the 50s or 60s. Single-story building shaped like an L, with rooms that opened directly to the parking lot. There was a separate area for trucks, with enough space for maybe 8 or 10 rigs. Only one other truck was parked there when I pulled in. The office was at the corner of the L, with a neon sign that said "Vacancy" in blue letters. Half the letters were burned out, but it was still readable. I shut down my rig and walked over to check in. The guy behind the counter was maybe 65, 70 years old. Thin as a rail, with white hair and these pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through you. He was wearing a white shirt and black tie, like he was dressed for church or a funeral. "Need a room for the night," I told him. "Certainly," he says in this soft voice. "How many hours rest do you require?" Weird way to phrase it, but I figured he was used to dealing with truckers and their logbook requirements. 10 hours minimum, I said. He nods and pulls out this old-fashioned registration book. Not a computer system like most places use now, but an actual paper book with carbon copies. "Room 14, he says, handing me an actual metal key. "That will be $45. I paid cash, which seemed to please him. He gave me a receipt written in careful handwriting and told me the ice machine was at the end of the building. Room 14 was clean but basic. Single bed, small table, chair, TV that looked like it was from the 80s. The bathroom was tiny but functional. Everything had this old-fashioned feel to it, like the place hadn't been updated since it was built. I took a shower, ate a sandwich I'd packed, and tried to watch TV. Only got 3 channels, all showing static. Figured the antenna was broken or something. I was tired anyway, so I just went to bed. Here's where things get strange. I woke up in complete darkness. No light from outside, no glow from the clock radio, nothing. I reached for the lamp on the bedside table, but couldn't find the switch. Then I realized I couldn't hear anything either. No traffic from the highway, no air conditioning, no sounds from other rooms. Complete silence. I got out of bed and felt my way to the window. Pulled back the curtains expecting to see the parking lot, but there was nothing. Not darkness like you'd expect at night, but actual nothingness, like looking into a void. That's when I started to panic. I found my cell phone and turned on the flashlight app. The room looked normal in the light, but when I checked the time, my phone showed 12:12 a.m. I'd gone to bed around 9:30, so I'd only been asleep for a couple hours, but I felt completely rested, alert and awake like I'd slept for 10 hours. I tried the light switch by the door. Nothing. Tried the TV. Nothing. Even the digital clock that had been glowing green when I went to bed was completely dead. I got dressed and went outside to check on my truck. The parking lot was lit by these old-fashioned street lamps, but the light seemed wrong somehow. Too white, too bright, like fluorescent lights instead of the warm yellow you'd expect from street lamps. My truck was where I'd parked it, but something was off. The trailer doors were open. Not wide open, just cracked about 6 inches. I always check those doors before I sleep, and I know they were closed and locked. I walked over to investigate and found the padlock was still in place, but the doors were definitely open. I shined my phone light into the trailer and nearly jumped out of my skin. It was empty, completely empty. The load of electronics I'd been hauling from LA was gone. $40,000 worth of computer equipment just vanished. I'm standing there trying to process this when I hear voices. Quiet conversations coming from the other end of the parking lot. I look over and see people walking around near the hotel office. Maybe 10 or 12 people, all dressed in dark clothing. At first I think maybe it's other guests, but something about the way they're moving doesn't seem right. They're walking in these perfect straight lines, making 90-degree turns, like they're following an invisible grid pattern. I start walking toward them, thinking maybe they saw something, maybe they know what happened to my load. But as I get closer, I can see they're not normal people. They're all exactly the same height, all wearing identical clothing, all moving in that same mechanical way, and when they turn to look at me, their faces are completely blank. No expression, no recognition, nothing. I stop about 50 feet away and just watch. They seem to be having conversations, but I can't make out any words. It's more like a humming sound, rising and falling like speech, but without any actual language. Then they all stop at once and turn to face me. Every single one of them, at exactly the same time. They stand there staring for maybe 30 seconds, then turn away and walk toward the desert behind the hotel. I watch them disappear into the darkness, then hurry back to my room. I lock the door, push the chair against it, and sit on the bed with my phone in my hand. I try calling my dispatcher, but there's no signal. Try calling 911, same thing. No bars, no service. I must have sat there for hours, but when I checked the time again, it was still 12:12 a.m. The clock hadn't moved at all. Finally, I see light starting to come through the curtains. Real sunlight, not that weird artificial light from the parking lot lamps. I look outside and everything appears normal. My truck is still there, other vehicles in the parking lot, the highway visible in the distance. I go out to check my trailer again. The doors are closed and locked, just like they should be. I open them up and my load is there. Every box, every piece of equipment, exactly where it should be. But I know what I saw. That trailer was empty in the middle of the night. I packed up my stuff and went to the office to check out. The old man is there behind the counter, same white shirt and black tie, looking like he hadn't moved since the night before. "Did you rest well?" he asks. "Fine," I lie. Everything was fine. He processes my checkout without saying anything else. I get in my truck and drive away as fast as legally possible. The rest of the trip to Denver was normal. Delivered my load on time, everything accounted for. But I kept thinking about that night at the Starlight Motor Court. I've driven that route dozens of times since then, always looking for the sign for the Starlight. Never found it again. Asked other drivers if they knew the place, but nobody had ever heard of it. About 6 months later, I was talking to another trucker at a truck stop in Flagstaff. Old-timer like me, been driving for 40 years. I mentioned the Starlight Motor Court, and he got this strange look on his face. "You stayed there?" he asks. "Yeah, why?" "That place burned down in 1978, he says. "Electrical fire. Killed 3 people. I told him that was impossible, that I'd stayed there just a few months earlier. He just shook his head and said I must be thinking of a different place. But I know what I experienced. I know where I stayed that night, and I know those people I saw in the parking lot weren't normal hotel guests. Sometimes when I'm driving through Nevada late at night, I think I see that neon sign in my peripheral vision. Starlight Motor Court, truck friendly. But when I turn to look, there's never anything there, just empty desert and the endless highway stretching ahead." Story 5. The college road trip. This happened during spring break my junior year at Arizona State. Me and my roommate Jess decided to drive up to Seattle to visit her cousin instead of doing the typical Cabo thing that everyone else was doing. We thought it would be more adventurous, you know. Road trip through the desert, see some different scenery, save money. We left Temp on a Saturday morning in my Honda Civic, which in retrospect was probably not the best car for a 1,500-mile road trip, but we were 20 and invincible and didn't think about stuff like that. The plan was to drive straight through with minimal stops, taking turns at the wheel every few hours. Everything went fine until we hit this stretch of highway in northern Nevada. It was probably around 2 a.m. and we were both getting pretty tired. Jess was driving and I was trying to stay awake to keep her company, but the desert at night is hypnotic. Just empty black space and the occasional set of headlights going the other direction. We'd been looking for a place to stop for like an hour. This was before smartphones were really a thing, so we were relying on those blue highway signs to tell us where the hotels were. Most of the exits we passed either had nothing or just a gas station. Finally, we see a sign for lodging at the next exit. Desert Palms Inn, it said, which sounded promising. The exit ramp led to this 2-lane road that went straight out into the desert. We drove for maybe 10 minutes before we saw any lights. The Desert Palms Inn was this sprawling single-story complex that looked like it had been built in the 70s. Adobe-style architecture, flat roofs, kind of a southwestern theme. There were palm trees around the entrance, which seemed weird in the middle of the Nevada desert, but whatever. The parking lot was about half full, which was encouraging. At least we weren't the only people who'd found this place. Jess parked near the front entrance, and we grabbed our overnight bags. The lobby was actually pretty nice. Tile floors, comfortable seating areas, a front desk that looked modern and professional. There was soft music playing, some kind of ambient instrumental stuff, and the lighting was warm and welcoming. The desk clerk was a woman in her 30s, really put together, with perfect makeup and hair despite it being the middle of the night. She greeted us with this bright smile and asked how she could help us. "We need a room for the night," Jess said. "2 beds if you have it." "Of course," the woman said. "How long will you be staying with us?" "Just tonight," I said. "We're driving to Seattle." She nodded and started typing on her computer. "I have a lovely room available. Ground floor facing the courtyard. Very quiet and peaceful." The rate was reasonable, especially split between the 2 of us. We paid with Jess's credit card and the woman handed us 2 key cards. "You're in room 123, she said. "The ice machine is just down the hall, and we have a complimentary continental breakfast starting at 6 a.m. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight?" We said no thanks and headed for our room. The hallways were nicely decorated with southwestern art and had this subtle lighting that made everything feel calm and relaxing. Our room was about halfway down a long corridor. Room 123 was perfect. 2 queen beds, clean bathroom, TV with cable, mini fridge, the works. Everything was decorated in these soothing earth tones, and the beds looked incredibly comfortable. "This place is awesome," Jess said, flopping down on one of the beds. "How did we find such a nice hotel in the middle of nowhere?" I was wondering the same thing. The Desert Palms Inn was way nicer than anything we could usually afford, and the rate had been surprisingly low for the quality. We both took quick showers and got ready for bed. I was exhausted from all the driving and fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night feeling really disoriented. The room was completely dark, darker than it should have been with the parking lot lights outside. I fumbled around for the lamp on the bedside table but couldn't find the switch. "Jess?" I whispered, but there was no answer from the other bed. I reached over to where she should have been sleeping, but the bed was empty. Not just empty like she'd gotten up to use the bathroom, but cold empty, like nobody had been sleeping there at all. I found my phone and used it as a flashlight. Jess's bed was perfectly made, like housekeeping had just been through. Her overnight bag was gone, her clothes weren't scattered around like they had been when we went to sleep. It was like she had never been there at all. I checked the bathroom, thinking maybe she was sick or something, but it was empty too, and weirdly clean. The towels we'd used after our showers were gone, replaced by fresh ones. The toiletries we'd left on the counter had vanished. I was starting to panic. I tried calling Jess's cell phone but got a message saying the number was not in service, which was impossible because I'd talked to her on that phone earlier in the day. I got dressed and went out to the parking lot to look for my car. The parking lot was completely empty except for one vehicle, a white sedan that I didn't recognize. My Honda Civic was nowhere to be seen. Now I'm really freaking out. I go back to the lobby to ask the desk clerk what's going on, but the lobby is dark. Not just closed for the night dark, but completely empty dark. Like the hotel is abandoned. I try the front doors, but they're locked. I bang on the glass and shout for help, but nobody comes. The whole place feels deserted. I walk around the building looking for another way in or someone to help me, but all the windows are dark and there's no sign of life anywhere. It's like everyone just vanished. I'm standing in the parking lot trying to figure out what to do when I notice something weird about the palm trees around the entrance. In the daylight they'd look normal, but now in the darkness I can see they're not real. They're plastic. Fake palm trees that someone had planted to make the place look more tropical. And the more I look around, the more things seem off. The building looks older and more run down than it had when we checked in. Some of the windows are boarded up and there's graffiti on the walls that I hadn't noticed before. I try my phone again, but there's no signal. No bars, no service, nothing. The time on my phone says 4:37 a.m., but it feels like I've been awake for hours. I start walking back toward the highway, hoping to flag down a passing car or find a payphone. The road seems longer than it had when we drove in, and I'm walking for what feels like miles before I see the highway lights. When I finally reach the main road, I see a truck stop about a quarter mile away. I run toward it, and when I get there, the attendant looks at me like I'm crazy. "You okay, honey?" she asks. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I try to explain about the hotel and my missing friend in my car, but it comes out all jumbled and incoherent. The woman gives me a cup of coffee and lets me use the phone to call the police. 2 officers show up about 20 minutes later. They're professional and polite, but I can tell they think I'm either lying or having some kind of breakdown. They drive me back to where the Desert Palms Inn should be. There's nothing there, just empty desert and the concrete foundation of what might have been a building once upon a time. Weeds growing up through cracks in the concrete, rusted metal posts that might have held up signs. "Miss, are you sure this is where you stayed?" one of the officers asks. "I'm sure, but the evidence says otherwise. There's no hotel, no parking lot, no fake palm trees, just desert and ruins." The officers drive me back to the truck stop and suggest I call someone to come pick me up. But when I try to call my parents, they act like they don't know who I am. Same with other friends from school. It's like I don't exist in their lives anymore. Finally, I called Jess's cousin in Seattle, the one we were supposed to visit. She answers on the 3rd ring. "Hello. Hi, this is Sarah, Jess's roommate from ASU. We were supposed to drive up to visit you for spring break." Long pause. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. I don't know anyone named Jess." I hang up and just sit there in the truck stop trying to process what's happening. According to everyone I've called, Jess doesn't exist. According to the police, the hotel doesn't exist. According to my phone, half my contacts have vanished. The truck stop attendant takes pity on me and lets me stay until morning. When the sun comes up, she drives me to the nearest bus station and buys me a ticket back to Phoenix. The bus ride takes all day, and I spend the whole time trying to figure out what happened. By the time I get back to Temp, I've almost convinced myself that I had some kind of breakdown, that maybe I drove to Nevada by myself and hallucinated the whole thing about Jess. But when I get back to my dorm room, there's no sign that Jess ever existed. Her bed is gone, her desk is gone, her clothes and personal items have vanished. It's like the room was always a single. I go to the housing office to ask about my roommate, but according to their records, I've had a single room all year. They have no record of anyone named Jessica Martinez ever being enrolled at ASU. I check my photos on my phone and computer. All the pictures of me and Jess are gone. Pictures of just me are still there, but any photo that included her has vanished. It's like she never existed at all. I tried to find some record of her online, but there's nothing. No social media profiles, no high school records, nothing. I even drove to the address in Phoenix where she'd said she grew up, but the people living there had never heard of her family. That was 3 years ago. I graduated, got a job, moved on with my life. But I still think about that night at the Desert Palms Inn. I still wonder what really happened to Jess, if she ever existed at all. Sometimes I drive out to that stretch of highway in Nevada, looking for the ruins I saw with the police officers. But I've never been able to find them again. It's like that whole area has been erased from reality. I don't talk about this with people because I know how it sounds. But I know what I experienced. I know Jess was real, even if nobody else remembers her. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I'm the one who doesn't really exist, if maybe I'm the one who got erased, and I'm just a ghost haunting a life that was never really mine. Story 6. The Salesman Stopped. Let me tell you something about being on the road 40 weeks a year selling medical equipment to hospitals across the Midwest. You get to know every decent hotel between Chicago and Kansas City, every truck stop with clean bathrooms, every diner that serves real coffee instead of that burnt swill most places try to pass off. After 18 years of this job, I thought I'd seen every kind of lodging establishment there was. Luxury chains, budget motels, bed and breakfast run by sweet old ladies, sketchy places where you sleep with one eye open. But what happened to me at the Crossroads Inn in Missouri still doesn't make sense, even 5 years later. This was October of 2018. I'd spent 3 days in Springfield trying to convince the purchasing department at Mercy Hospital to upgrade their imaging equipment. Big potential sale, 6-figure commission if I could close it. The meetings had gone well, but they wanted to think it over for a week before making a decision. I was driving back to Chicago on Highway 65 when I hit the worst rainstorm I'd seen in years. Not just heavy rain, but the kind of biblical downpour that makes your windshield wipers useless and reduces visibility to maybe 20 feet. Every few minutes, there'd be lightning that lit up the sky like daylight, followed by thunder that rattled my rental car. I'm not stupid enough to drive in conditions like that, so I started looking for a place to pull over. Problem was, this stretch of Missouri is pretty rural. Lots of farmland, small towns, not many services right off the highway. I was crawling along at maybe 30 miles per hour with my hazard lights on when I saw a sign through the rain. Crossroads Inn, next exit, clean rooms, restaurant. The sign looked old but well maintained, and frankly I didn't care about the amenities. I just needed somewhere safe to wait out the storm. The exit led to a 2-lane country road that wound through some hills. I drove for about 5 minutes before I saw the inn, sitting by itself in a clearing surrounded by tall oak trees. It was a 2-story building with white clapboard siding and green shutters, very New England style, which seemed odd for Missouri, but what do I know? The parking lot was gravel, not paved, and there were maybe 8 or 10 cars scattered around. Mostly older vehicles, nothing fancy. I parked as close to the front entrance as I could and made a run for it through the rain. The lobby was small but cozy, with hardwood floors and furniture that looked like genuine antiques. There was a stone fireplace with a real fire burning, which felt great after getting soaked. The whole place had this old-fashioned charm that you don't see much anymore. Behind the front desk was a man who looked to be in his 70s. Completely bald, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a cardigan sweater that had seen better days. He looked up from a book he was reading and smiled. "Terrible night to be traveling," he said. "Looking for a room, please," I said. "Just for the night. Hopefully this storm will pass by morning." "Oh, it will," he said with confidence. "Always does. Let me see what I have available." He opened an old-fashioned guest register, the kind with actual pages instead of a computer system. His handwriting was careful and precise as he wrote down my information. "Room 7, he said, handing me an actual metal key. "Second floor, overlooks the garden. Quiet and comfortable. That'll be $65. I paid cash, which seemed to please him. He gave me directions to the room and mentioned that the restaurant stayed open until 10 p.m. if I was interested in dinner. Room 7 was exactly what he'd promised. Clean, comfortable, decorated with antiques that looked authentic. The bed had a handmade quilt and more pillows than I knew what to do with. The bathroom was small but functional, with an old-fashioned clawfoot tub that looked inviting. I took a hot shower and changed into dry clothes, then went downstairs to check out the restaurant. It was a small dining room with maybe 12 tables, about half of them occupied. The other guests were mostly older couples, the kind of people who probably stayed at places like this regularly. The waitress was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a friendly demeanor. She recommended the pot roast, which turned out to be excellent. Real comfort food, the kind of meal that makes you forget about your troubles for a while. I was finishing my coffee when I noticed something odd. The other diners weren't really talking to each other. Oh, they were having conversations, but something about the rhythm seemed off, like they were reciting lines from a script rather than having natural discussions, and they all seemed to be watching me. Not obviously, but I'd catch them glancing in my direction when they thought I wasn't looking. It made me uncomfortable, so I finished my meal quickly and went back to my room. The storm was still raging outside, but the sound of rain on the roof was actually kind of soothing. I watched some TV, made a few phone calls to follow up on other sales prospects, then went to bed around 11. I woke up in complete darkness. The digital clock on the bedside table was dark, no power. I fumbled for my phone to check the time, but the screen wouldn't turn on. The battery had been at 70% when I went to bed, so it should have been fine. I got up and tried the light switch, but nothing happened. Power must have gone out during the storm. I felt my way to the window to see if the whole area was dark, but when I pulled back the curtains, what I saw made no sense. The parking lot was full of cars. Not just the 8 or 10 that had been there when I arrived, but dozens of them. Old cars like from the 50s and 60s. They were arranged in perfect rows and every single one was identical. Same make, same model, same color. And there were people standing beside each car. Men in dark suits, women in conservative dresses, all facing toward the hotel. They weren't moving, just standing there in the rain like statues. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, thinking maybe I was still half asleep. But they were definitely there. Maybe 60 or 70 people, all dressed like they were from a different era, all standing motionless in the rain. Then, as I watched, they all turned to look directly at my window. Every single one of them at exactly the same time. Even though I was on the second floor and the room was dark, I could feel them staring at me. I jerked back from the window and grabbed my clothes. Whatever was going on, I wanted no part of it. I got dressed as quickly as I could and packed my overnight bag. The hallway was pitch black, but I used my hands to feel along the wall toward the stairs. The old wooden floors creaked under my feet, and every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. When I reached the lobby, I could see a faint glow coming from the fireplace. The fire was still burning, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The old man from the front desk was sitting in a chair beside the fireplace, reading his book by the firelight. "Leaving us so soon?" he asked without looking up. "Power's out," I said. "I need to get back on the road." "Oh, the power will be back on shortly," he said. "No need to rush off into the storm." "I'll be fine," I said, heading for the front door. "Mr. Davidson," he said, and I stopped cold. I hadn't told him my name when I checked in. I'd paid cash and signed the register, but I was sure I'd just written my initials. I turned around to look at him, but he was gone. The chair was empty, the book lying open on the seat. The fire was still burning, but there was no sign of the old man. I ran for the door and pushed outside into the rain. The parking lot looked normal again, just the same 8 or 10 cars that had been there when I arrived, no vintage vehicles, no people standing in the rain. My rental car started right up, and I drove out of there as fast as the wet roads would allow. The storm was already starting to clear, and by the time I reached the highway, the rain had stopped completely. I drove straight through to Chicago, stopping only for gas and coffee. When I got home, I tried to find information about the Crossroads Inn online, but couldn't find any record of it. No website, no reviews, no business listings. I called the Missouri Tourism Board and described the location, but they said there was no inn in that area. Just farmland and a few small towns. A few weeks later, I had to drive back to Springfield for a follow-up meeting. I took the same route and looked for the exit where I'd found the Crossroads Inn. I found the road, but when I drove down it, there was nothing there. Just an empty field with the foundation of what might have been a building once upon a time. I asked at a gas station in the nearest town if they knew anything about an old inn in that area. The attendant, a guy who looked like he'd lived there his whole life, said there used to be a hotel there back in the 1950s. Called it the Crossroads Inn. Burned down in '57, he said. Killed everyone inside, 23 guests and 4 staff members. Real tragedy. What happened? I asked. Electrical fire, they said. Started in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm. Nobody got out. I thanked him and drove away, but I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. 23 guests and 4 staff members. 27 people total. I'd seen maybe 60 or 70 people standing in that parking lot. I still travel that route several times a year for work, and I always look for that exit. Sometimes on stormy nights when the visibility is poor, I think I see the sign for the Crossroads Inn. But when I get closer, there's never anything there. Just empty fields and the memory of a place that shouldn't exist. Story 7. The Grad Students Conference. I'm a doctoral student in anthropology at UC Berkeley, and last year I was presenting a paper at a conference in Albuquerque. It was my first time presenting original research at a major academic conference, so I was pretty nervous about the whole thing. I'd been working on this paper about indigenous folklore in the Southwest for like 8 months. The conference was at the convention center downtown, but all the hotels in the area were booked because of some big music festival happening the same weekend. My advisor managed to find me a room at this place called the Adobe Inn about 20 minutes outside the city. She said it was a little quirky, but clean and affordable, which was perfect for my grad student budget. I flew into Albuquerque on a Thursday afternoon and picked up my rental car at the airport. The Adobe Inn was way out in the desert, past the suburban developments and strip malls, on this winding road that seemed to go nowhere. I was starting to think I'd gotten lost when I finally saw the sign. The inn was this sprawling adobe complex that looked like it had been built in stages over several decades. Some parts looked authentically southwestern, while other sections seemed more modern. There were probably 30 or 40 rooms total, arranged around a central courtyard with a fountain and lots of desert landscaping. I parked in front of the office and went inside to check in. The lobby was decorated with Native American art and pottery, some of which looked museum quality. There were comfortable leather chairs arranged around a fireplace, and soft instrumental music was playing from hidden speakers. The woman at the front desk was probably in her 40s, with long dark hair and turquoise jewelry. She had this serene, almost ethereal quality about her, like she was perpetually calm and centered. "You must be Sarah," she said before I even introduced myself. "We've been expecting you." I was surprised she knew my name, but figured my advisor had called ahead or something. She handed me a key card and a small map of the property. "You're in room 28, she said. "It's in the east wing, very quiet. Perfect for studying." The rate was incredibly reasonable, way less than I'd expected to pay. I thanked her and asked about breakfast, Wi-Fi, that sort of thing. She said breakfast was included and that the internet was excellent throughout the property. Room 28 was at the end of a long hallway lined with more Native American art. The room itself was gorgeous. Adobe walls, wooden beam ceiling, handmade furniture that looked like it came from local artisans. There was a small desk by the window that looked perfect for last-minute presentation prep. I unpacked my clothes and spread my research materials on the desk. My presentation was scheduled for Saturday morning, so I had all of Thursday evening and Friday to practice and make final revisions. Around 7 p.m., I decided to walk around the property and maybe find some dinner. The Adobe Inn had a small restaurant attached to the main building, but when I checked, they were closed for a private event. The desk clerk suggested a Mexican place about 10 minutes away. As I was walking back to my car, I noticed something interesting. There were other guests at the inn, but they all seemed to be academics like me. I could tell because they had that unmistakable grad student look. Slightly rumpled clothes, canvas messenger bags, the kind of intense focus that comes from spending too much time in libraries. At the restaurant, I ended up sitting next to a couple who were also staying at the Adobe Inn. They were both anthropologists from different universities, also presenting papers at the same conference. We got to talking about our research, and I mentioned how convenient it was that we'd all ended up at the same hotel. "Convenient," the woman said. I thought it was weird. I mean, what are the odds that an obscure hotel 20 minutes outside the city would be full of people from our specific conference? I hadn't really thought about it that way, but she was right. Academic conferences aren't that big, maybe 300 people total, and most attendees would want to stay downtown near the convention center, not out in the desert. The next morning, I went to the continental breakfast in the inn's dining room. There were maybe 15 people there, and every single one was an academic. Not just academics, but specifically anthropologists and archaeologists. I recognized some of them from their published papers. I struck up a conversation with a professor from Northwestern who was studying petroglyphs in the region. He mentioned that he'd been trying to book a hotel downtown, but everything was full. Then someone at his university had recommended the Adobe Inn. "Same here," I said. "My advisor found this place for me. Funny thing is," he said, "I asked my colleague how she knew about this place, and she couldn't remember. Said the name just popped into her head when I mentioned needing a hotel." That was strange, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I spent most of Friday in my room working on my presentation, occasionally taking breaks to walk around the courtyard. The inn was beautiful, really peaceful, exactly the kind of place where you could focus and get work done. Friday evening, I decided to have dinner at the inn's restaurant, which was open for regular service. The dining room was small and intimate, with maybe 12 tables. About half were occupied, all by other conference attendees. I was seated at a table by myself, reading over my notes while I waited for my food. That's when I noticed something odd about the conversations around me. Everyone was talking about their research, which was normal for academics, but the topics were all related to extraterrestrial contact and ancient astronaut theories. Now, I should mention that this is not mainstream anthropology. The idea that ancient civilizations had contact with aliens is considered fringe science at best, pseudoscience at worst. It's not the kind of thing you'd hear discussed seriously at a major academic conference. But here were respected professors and graduate students from legitimate universities, all discussing evidence for alien intervention in human history like it was established fact. I listened more carefully to the conversations around me. A professor from Yale was talking about petroglyphs that supposedly depicted spacecraft. A grad student from Harvard was describing artifacts that showed signs of advanced metallurgy beyond the capabilities of ancient peoples. None of this was related to the actual conference we were attending. The Southwest Anthropological Association conference focused on traditional archaeological and ethnographic research, not speculative theories about alien contact. After dinner, I went back to my room feeling unsettled. I tried to work on my presentation, but I kept thinking about those conversations. I decided to do some research on my laptop. I started looking up the other guests I'd met, checking their academic profiles and published papers. What I found was disturbing. According to their university websites and publication records, none of them specialized in the areas they'd been discussing at dinner. The Yale professor who'd been talking about spacecraft petroglyphs was actually an expert in Mayan architecture. The Harvard grad student was studying traditional pottery techniques. Their online presence showed no interest in or connection to theories about ancient alien contact. But I'd heard them discussing these topics with the kind of detailed knowledge that comes from years of specialized study. I tried to focus on my presentation, but I was too distracted. Around midnight, I decided to take a walk around the property to clear my head. The courtyard was lit by small lights hidden among the plants, creating a peaceful, meditative atmosphere. That's when I saw them. There were people in the courtyard, maybe 20 or 30 of them, all standing in a perfect circle around the fountain. They weren't moving or talking, just standing there in complete silence. I recognized some of them as other guests from the inn. The Yale professor, the Harvard grad student, others I'd seen at breakfast or in the hallways. But something was wrong with the way they were standing. Too straight, too still, like they were frozen in place. I watched from the shadows for several minutes. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just stood there in that perfect circle, facing inward toward the fountain. Then, all at once, they started walking. Not toward the buildings or the parking lot, but out into the desert beyond the inn's property. They moved in single file, maintaining perfect spacing between each person. I followed at a distance, staying hidden behind the desert vegetation. They walked for maybe a quarter mile before stopping at what looked like a natural clearing. The ground was flat and sandy, with strange patterns carved into the surface. Not recent carvings, but old ones, weathered by years of wind and rain. The people arranged themselves around the perimeter of the clearing, still maintaining that perfect spacing. Then they all looked up at the sky. I looked up too and saw lights. Not stars, but moving lights that seemed to be descending toward the clearing. 3 of them, moving in formation, completely silent. The lights got closer and brighter, and I could see they weren't conventional aircraft. No wings, no engines, just smooth metallic shapes that reflected the moonlight. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt this strange sense of calm. Like this was perfectly natural, something I was supposed to witness. The objects landed in the clearing without making any sound. Openings appeared in their sides and figures emerged, tall, thin beings with pale skin and large eyes. They moved with the same deliberate, mechanical precision as the people from the inn. The beings approached the circle of humans, and I could see they were communicating somehow, not with words, but with gestures and movements that seemed to convey complex information. I watched this for maybe an hour before the beings returned to their craft and departed as silently as they'd arrived. The people from the inn stood there for a few more minutes, then walked back toward the hotel in the same single-file formation. I waited until they were out of sight before making my way back to the inn. My room was exactly as I'd left it, and I tried to convince myself that I'd dreamed the whole thing. But the next morning at breakfast, the conversations were different. Instead of discussing fringe theories about ancient aliens, everyone was talking about normal academic topics. Traditional archaeology, ethnographic methods, the kind of research you'd expect at a legitimate conference. It was like the previous day's conversations had never happened. I gave my presentation at the conference and it went well. I received good feedback from the audience and made some valuable professional connections. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd witnessed at the Adobe Inn. On my last night, I tried to stay awake to see if the gathering in the courtyard would happen again. But I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, it was morning and time to check out. The woman at the front desk was the same serene person who'd checked me in, but when I tried to ask her about the other guests and their research interests, she gave me blank looks. Like she had no idea what I was talking about. I've tried to find information about the Adobe Inn online, but there's very little. No reviews, no detailed descriptions, just a basic listing with contact information. I've also tried to follow up with some of the other guests I met, but their university email addresses don't work and their academic profiles don't match what I remember about their specializations. Sometimes I wonder if the whole experience was some kind of elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But I know what I saw in that desert clearing. I know what I witnessed. And sometimes late at night, when I'm working on my dissertation, I find myself researching topics that have nothing to do with my official area of study. Ancient petroglyphs that might depict spacecraft, archaeological anomalies that suggest advanced technology in prehistoric cultures. I tell myself it's just intellectual curiosity, but I can't shake the feeling that something was planted in my mind during those 3 days at the Adobe Inn. Some kind of knowledge or awareness that I'm not supposed to have. I'm planning to return to Albuquerque next year for the annual conference, and despite everything, I'm hoping the Adobe Inn will have a room available. Story 8. The Retiree's Journey. My wife Eleanor and I had been talking about taking a cross-country road trip for years. After I retired from teaching high school mathematics in Dayton, Ohio, we finally decided to do it. Eleanor had always wanted to see the Grand Canyon, and I was interested in visiting some of the Civil War battlefields we'd only read about. We planned the trip carefully, mapping out our route and making hotel reservations well in advance. This was important to us because we're both in our 70s and prefer to have everything organized rather than just winging it like younger folks might do. Our plan was to drive west through Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, and into Arizona over the course of 10 days. We'd take our time, stop at interesting historical sites, maybe do some antiquing in small towns along the way. Everything went smoothly for the first 4 days. We stayed at nice hotels, ate at recommended restaurants, saw some beautiful countryside. But on the 5th day, somewhere in eastern Colorado, we encountered a problem. Eleanor had been feeling under the weather that morning. Nothing serious, just a bit of stomach upset that she attributed to the rich food we'd been eating. But by afternoon, she was feeling quite poorly and asked if we could stop for the night earlier than planned. We were driving through fairly desolate country at the time. Lots of farmland and small communities, but not many services right along the highway. I started looking for exit signs that indicated lodging, but we drove for nearly an hour without seeing anything suitable. Eleanor was getting worse, complaining of nausea and dizziness. I was starting to worry that we might need to find a hospital rather than just a hotel room. Finally, we saw a sign for something called the Prairie View Motor Lodge. It wasn't one of the chain hotels we usually preferred, but Eleanor said she just needed to lie down somewhere quiet. The exit led to a small town that looked like it hadn't changed much since the 1950s. Main Street was lined with old-fashioned storefronts, many of them empty or boarded up. The motor lodge was at the far end of town, a single-story building with a neon sign that flickered intermittently. I parked in front of the office and helped Eleanor out of the car. She was quite pale and unsteady on her feet, which concerned me greatly. The lobby was small and dimly lit, with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Behind the front desk sat a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, with blonde hair and a pleasant smile. "Good evening," she said. "How can I help you folks?" "We need a room for the night," I said. "My wife isn't feeling well and needs to rest." The young woman looked at Eleanor with what seemed like genuine concern. "Oh my, she does look peaked. Let me get you folks settled right away." She handed me an old-fashioned metal key attached to a plastic tag. "Room 12, she said. "It's our quietest room, faces away from the street. I think your wife will be very comfortable there." The rate was quite reasonable, much less than we'd been paying at the chain hotels. I paid cash and the woman gave me a receipt written in careful longhand. Room 12 was clean and comfortable, though decorated in a style that was probably fashionable 30 years ago. The bed was firm and the bathroom was spotless. Eleanor lay down immediately and said she felt a bit better just being horizontal. I unpacked our overnight bags and made sure Eleanor had everything she needed. She dozed off almost immediately, which was unusual for her. Eleanor typically has trouble sleeping in unfamiliar places, but she seemed to fall into a very deep sleep. Around 9 o'clock, I decided to take a walk around the town to stretch my legs and maybe find somewhere to get Eleanor some plain crackers or ginger ale for her stomach. The main street was completely deserted, which wasn't surprising for a small town on a weeknight. Most of the storefronts were dark, but I could see lights in the windows of what appeared to be residential areas behind the main street. There was a small grocery store that looked like it might be open, so I walked over to check. The store was indeed open, though there were no other customers inside. The proprietor was an elderly man who greeted me warmly and asked if I was passing through town. "Just for the night," I said. "My wife isn't feeling well, so we stopped at the motor lodge." "The Prairie View," he said, nodding. "Nice quiet place. Your wife should rest well there." I bought some crackers, ginger ale, and a few other items that might help with Eleanor's stomach upset. The man was quite chatty, telling me about the town's history and pointing out landmarks that might interest a visitor. "Been here all my life," he said. "Seen a lot of changes over the years, but some things stay the same." I thanked him and walked back to the motor lodge. Eleanor was still sleeping soundly, so I didn't disturb her. I read for a while and then went to bed myself. I woke up around 3 in the morning feeling disoriented. The room was completely dark, darker than it should have been with the parking lot lights outside. I reached for the lamp on the bedside table, but couldn't find the switch. Eleanor was sleeping so quietly that I couldn't hear her breathing, which alarmed me. I felt for her pulse and was relieved to find it strong and steady, but her sleep seemed unnaturally deep. I got up and felt my way to the window to check if there was a power outage. When I pulled back the curtains, I was surprised to see the parking lot was full of cars. Not just full, but packed with vehicles of every description. Old cars, new cars, trucks, motorcycles, even a few RVs. This didn't make sense because the motor lodge only had maybe 20 rooms, and most of them had appeared to be empty when we checked in. I watched through the window for several minutes, trying to understand what I was seeing. The vehicles were arranged in perfect rows, and there were people standing beside each one. Men, women, children, all dressed in clothing from different time periods. Some were wearing modern clothes, others looked like they were from the 1980s or 90s. But there were also people in clothing that looked much older. 1950s styles, 1940s, even some that looked like they might be from the 1920s or 30s. They were all standing perfectly still, facing toward the motor lodge. Not moving, not talking, just standing there in complete silence. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, thinking maybe I was still half asleep. But they were definitely there. Dozens of people from different eras, all gathered in the parking lot in the middle of the night. Then, as I watched, they all turned to look directly at my window. Every single person from every time period, turning in perfect unison to stare at me. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding. When I looked again a few minutes later, the parking lot was empty. No cars, no people, nothing. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair, afraid to go back to sleep. Eleanor continued to sleep deeply, more peacefully than I'd seen her sleep in years. When morning came, she woke up feeling completely refreshed. Her stomach upset was gone, and she said she felt better than she had in months. "That was the best night's sleep I've had in ages," she said. "This place is wonderful." I didn't mention what I'd seen during the night. Eleanor has always been the practical one in our marriage, and I knew she'd think I'd been dreaming. We checked out after breakfast, and the same young woman was working at the front desk. She asked how Eleanor was feeling and seemed genuinely pleased to hear that she was much better. "Sometimes people just need a good night's rest in the right place," she said with a knowing smile. As we were loading our luggage into the car, I asked Eleanor if she'd noticed anything unusual about the motor lodge. Just how quiet it was, she said. I didn't hear a single sound all night, very peaceful. I decided not to pursue the subject. Eleanor was feeling better, which was the important thing. We continued our trip and had a wonderful time seeing the Grand Canyon and other sites we'd planned to visit. Eleanor's health remained excellent for the rest of the journey. But I couldn't stop thinking about that night at the Prairie View Motor Lodge. When we got home to Dayton, I tried to find information about the place online. I searched for the town name, the Motor Lodge, anything that might give me more details about what we'd experienced. I found very little. The town appeared on maps, but there was almost no information about its history or current status. No website for the Motor Lodge, no reviews from other travelers. I did find one interesting item in a digitized newspaper archive. An article from 1963 about a motor lodge in that area that had been the site of a tragic accident. A bus carrying a church group had crashed during a severe thunderstorm, killing 37 people. The article mentioned that the victims had been staying at the Prairie View Motor Lodge while traveling to a religious conference in Denver. I showed the article to Eleanor, but she just said it was a sad coincidence. She didn't seem to think there was any connection to our experience there. A few months later, Eleanor's doctor commented on how much better she looked during her regular checkup. Her blood pressure was improved, her energy levels were higher, and some minor health issues she'd been dealing with seemed to have resolved themselves. "Whatever you two did on that vacation," he said, "it was good for you. I've thought about returning to the Prairie View Motor Lodge, perhaps to see if I can learn more about its history. But Eleanor says she'd rather not. She says some experiences are meant to be left alone, that we should just be grateful for whatever healing she received there." Maybe she's right. We're both in our late 70s now, and good health is more important than satisfying curiosity about unexplained events. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those people in the parking lot, all those travelers from different eras gathered together in that quiet place. And I wonder if we were meant to be there that night, if Eleanor's illness was somehow guided to bring us to a place where she could receive whatever help she needed. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Story 9, the teenager's discovery. So this is going to sound totally crazy, and I know nobody's going to believe me, but I have to tell someone about what happened last summer when I was staying at this hotel with my family. I'm 16 now, but I was 15 when this happened, and honestly I'm still freaked out about it. We were driving from Austin to visit my grandparents in Phoenix, and my dad decided we should stop overnight in some small town in New Mexico instead of driving straight through. My mom was all worried about us kids being tired and cranky in the car for 12 hours, so she agreed even though it meant spending money on a hotel. The town was called something like Roswell Junction or something like that. I don't really remember the exact name. It was one of those places that's basically just a wide spot in the highway with a gas station and maybe a diner. Not exactly a tourist destination, if you know what I mean. There was only one hotel in town, this place called the Desert Star Inn. It looked pretty old and kind of run down from the outside, but my dad said it was clean and cheap, so whatever. My little sister Emma was being a total brat about having to share a room with me, but my parents said we could deal with it for one night. The guy at the front desk was probably like 40-something, kind of weird-looking with really pale skin and these intense blue eyes. He kept staring at me and Emma in this way that made me uncomfortable, but my parents didn't seem to notice. We got 2 adjoining rooms on the second floor. My parents in one, me and Emma in the other. The rooms were actually pretty nice inside, way nicer than I expected from how the place looked outside. New furniture, big flat screen TVs, really comfortable beds. Emma fell asleep pretty much immediately after dinner, which was typical for her. She can sleep anywhere, anytime. But I've always had trouble sleeping in hotels, so I was just lying there playing games on my phone and listening to music. Around midnight I heard voices outside our window. Not loud voices, but definitely people talking. I got up to look and saw there were people in the parking lot. Like a lot of people, maybe 20 or 30 of them. But here's the weird part. They were all kids. Like teenagers and younger kids, no adults at all. And they were all wearing the same clothes. Not like uniforms exactly, but everyone had on dark pants and white shirts, like they were dressed for school or something. I watched them for a while trying to figure out what was going on. They weren't really talking the way normal kids talk. It was more like they were having these really formal conversations, like they were reading from a script or something. And they all looked really similar. Not identical, but like they could all be related. Same height, same build, same way of moving. It was super weird. I thought about waking up Emma to show her, but she was dead asleep and would probably just tell me I was being stupid anyway. So I just kept watching from the window. After maybe 10 minutes, they all started walking toward the desert behind the hotel. Not running or anything, just walking in this really organized way like they knew exactly where they were going. I couldn't see where they went because it was too dark, but I kept watching for them to come back. I must have fallen asleep at the window because the next thing I knew it was morning and Emma was shaking me awake. "Why are you sleeping by the window, weirdo?" she said. I told her about the kids I'd seen, but she just rolled her eyes and said I was probably dreaming, which is typical Emma. She never believes anything I tell her. At breakfast, I tried to ask the desk guy about other guests at the hotel, like if there were any school groups or whatever staying there. But he just gave me this blank look and said we were the only guests that night. That didn't make sense because I definitely saw all those kids. But adults never believe teenagers about anything, so I didn't push it. We checked out and got back on the road to Phoenix. The rest of the trip was totally normal, and I kind of forgot about the whole thing until we were driving back home a week later. We took the same route, and I was looking for the Desert Star Inn because I wanted to see it again in daylight. But when we got to the town, there was no hotel. Just the gas station and diner, no sign that there had ever been a hotel there. I asked my dad about it, and he said I must be thinking of a different town. But I knew it was the same place because I recognized the gas station and the weird rock formation behind it. My mom said maybe the hotel had been torn down while we were in Phoenix, but that seemed impossible. You don't tear down an entire hotel in 1 week. When we got home, I tried to look up the Desert Star Inn online but couldn't find anything. No website, no reviews, no pictures, nothing. Like it never existed. I even tried searching for the town name but couldn't find any place called Roswell Junction in New Mexico. There's Roswell obviously, but that's a big city and not where we stayed. The really weird part is that when I asked my parents about the hotel a few months later, they said they didn't remember staying at any hotel on that trip. They said we drove straight through from Austin to Phoenix without stopping overnight. But I know that's not true because I remember the hotel room, I remember having dinner at the diner, I remember seeing those kids in the parking lot. Emma doesn't remember it either, but she has a terrible memory anyway, so that's not surprising. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I have this theory that maybe we didn't actually stay at a real hotel. Like maybe it was some kind of simulation or hologram or something. I know that sounds insane, but think about it. All those kids looked too similar to be normal kids. They moved wrong and talked wrong like they were programmed or something. And the hotel itself was way too nice inside compared to how it looked outside. Like someone was trying to make it seem normal, but didn't quite get it right. Plus the fact that nobody remembers it and there's no record of it online is super suspicious. It's like someone erased all evidence that it ever existed. I've been researching stuff about alien abductions and missing time, and a lot of the stories sound similar to what I experienced. People staying at hotels that don't exist, meeting people who don't seem quite human, having their memories altered afterward. I know most people think that stuff is just crazy conspiracy theories, but after what I experienced, I'm not so sure. Maybe there really are aliens among us, and they have these fake hotels where they study people or something. The thing that really bothers me is wondering what happened during the hours I can't remember clearly. I remember going to sleep at the window, but then it was suddenly morning. What happened in between? Did those kids come back? Did something happen to me and my family that we don't remember? Sometimes I have these dreams about being in a really bright room with those pale blue-eyed people asking me questions. But I can never remember what they asked or what I said. When I wake up, I just have this feeling that something important happened, but I can't remember what. I've tried talking to my friends about it, but they all think I'm making it up or that I watched too many sci-fi movies. Even my best friend Jake thinks I'm being paranoid. But I know what I experienced was real. I know we stayed at that hotel, and I know those kids weren't normal human kids. Something weird is going on, and I think there are places out there that aren't what they seem. I'm planning to go back to that area when I get my license next year. I want to find that town again and see if the hotel is still there or if there are any clues about what really happened. Maybe I'll bring a camera next time so I can prove to people that I'm not making this up. Although knowing my luck, the camera probably wouldn't work properly or the pictures would come out all blurry. That's what always happens in the movies, right? The evidence always disappears or gets destroyed somehow. But I'm not giving up. I'm gonna figure out what happened to us at the Desert Star Inn even if nobody believes me. Story 10. The Widow's Respite. I hadn't traveled anywhere in 3 years, not since Harold passed. We used to take little trips together, nothing fancy. Just weekend getaways to antique shops or historical sites within driving distance of our home in Springfield, Illinois. After the funeral, I just didn't see the point in going anywhere alone. But my daughter Susan kept insisting I needed to get out of the house, maybe visit my sister Margaret in Santa Fe. She even offered to pay for the trip, which was sweet of her, but also made me feel like a charity case. Finally, I agreed to drive out there, thinking maybe the change of scenery would do me some good. I planned the route carefully, the way Harold and I always did. Small highways instead of interstates when possible, stops at interesting places along the way. I wasn't in any hurry, and at 72 years old, I figured I'd earned the right to take my time. The first day went fine. I drove through Missouri and into Kansas, stopping for lunch in a little town that reminded me of the place where Harold and I honeymooned 48 years ago. I spent the night at a nice chain hotel in Dodge City, had dinner at the restaurant next door, called Susan to let her know I was safe. The second day was when things got strange. I was driving through western Kansas, planning to stop for the night somewhere in Colorado, when my car started making an odd noise. Not a terrible noise, just a rhythmic clicking that hadn't been there before. Harold always said you should never ignore unusual sounds from a car, so I started looking for a place to have it checked. The problem was, I was in the middle of nowhere. Flat farmland stretching to the horizon in every direction, with maybe one small town every 20 miles. Most of them didn't look like they had much in the way of automotive services. I was starting to worry when I saw a sign for something called the Meadowbrook Inn. Next exit, full service AA approved. It wasn't a chain hotel I recognized, but the AA approval was reassuring. The exit led to a 2-lane road that wound through some low hills. After about 5 miles, I came to a small valley with a cluster of buildings nestled among tall cottonwood trees. The Meadowbrook Inn was a lovely 2-story structure that looked like it had been built in the 1920s, with white clapboard siding and green shutters. There was a separate building that appeared to be a garage with a sign advertising automotive repair services. Perfect for my situation. I parked in front of the main building and went inside. The lobby was beautifully appointed with period furniture and fresh flowers. Classical music was playing softly from speakers I couldn't see. Behind the front desk stood a woman about my age, with silver hair arranged in an elegant style that reminded me of actresses from the 1940s. She was wearing a navy blue dress with pearl jewelry, and when she smiled, her whole face lit up. "Good afternoon," she said in a cultured voice. "Welcome to the Meadowbrook Inn. How may I help you today?" I explained about the car trouble and asked if they had a room available for the night. She assured me that their mechanic was excellent and would take good care of my vehicle. "We have a lovely room available," she said. "Second floor, overlooking the garden, very peaceful and quiet." The rate was quite reasonable, and she didn't ask for a credit card, which surprised me. I paid cash and she handed me an old-fashioned metal key. "Dinner is served in our dining room until 8 o'clock, she said. "And please, make yourself at home. We want all our guests to feel like family here." Room 14 was charming. Antique furniture, handmade quilts, fresh flowers on the bedside table. The window looked out over a beautiful garden with roses and lavender and other flowers I couldn't identify. It was the kind of room that made you want to sit and read a good book. I unpacked my overnight bag and then went to find the mechanic about my car. He was a pleasant man in his 50s who listened to the clicking noise and nodded knowingly. "Sounds like a loose belt," he said. "Nothing serious, but you're smart to have it checked. I'll take a look this evening and have it fixed by morning." I felt much better knowing the car was in good hands. I spent the rest of the afternoon exploring the inn and its grounds. There was a library with comfortable chairs and shelves full of classic books, a sunroom with wicker furniture and potted plants, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs overlooking the garden. It was exactly the kind of place Harold and I would have loved to discover together. Around 6 o'clock, I went to the dining room for dinner. It was a small, intimate space with maybe 8 tables, about half of them occupied. The other guests appeared to be people my age, mostly couples, all dressed nicely for dinner. I was seated at a table by myself, which felt awkward at first. I'd gotten used to eating alone at home, but in a restaurant it still felt strange not to have Harold across from me. The waitress was a young woman with a warm smile who made me feel immediately comfortable. She recommended the pot roast, which turned out to be delicious. Real comfort food. the kind of meal that reminds you of Sunday dinners at your grandmother's house. As I was eating, I couldn't help but notice the conversations at the other tables. Everyone seemed to be discussing travel plans, places they'd been or wanted to visit. But something about their conversations felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Then I realized what was bothering me. All the other guests were talking about their spouses in the present tense, but I could tell they were traveling alone. The woman at the table next to me kept saying, "My husband thinks," and "we always enjoy," but there was no husband with her. It was like they were all pretending their spouses were still alive. After dinner, I sat in the library for a while, reading and trying not to think about how much Harold would have enjoyed this place. Around 9 o'clock, I decided to go to bed early. I slept better than I had in months. The bed was incredibly comfortable, and the silence was complete. No traffic noise, no neighbors, just the gentle sound of wind in the trees outside my window. I woke up feeling more rested than I had since Harold's death. The morning light streaming through the windows made the room look even more beautiful than it had the night before. At breakfast, I sat at the same table as the evening before. The dining room was full of the same guests, all having animated conversations about their travel plans. But in the daylight, I could see something I'd missed the night before. They all looked sad. Despite the cheerful conversations and pleasant smiles, there was a deep sadness in their eyes that I recognized because I saw it in my own mirror every morning. These were people who had lost someone important, people who were traveling alone but couldn't quite admit it, even to themselves. The realization should have depressed me, but instead it made me feel less alone. I wasn't the only one struggling with loss and loneliness. I wasn't the only one who still talked to my deceased spouse when no one was listening. After breakfast, I checked on my car. The mechanic had fixed the problem and refused to charge me more than the cost of the parts. "First time staying with us?" he asked as I was getting ready to leave. "Yes, and it's been lovely. I hope I can come back someday." He smiled. People usually find their way back when they need to. I checked out at the front desk, where the elegant woman was waiting with my receipt. "I hope you found what you were looking for," she said. "I wasn't looking for anything in particular," I replied. "Sometimes that's when we find the most important things," she said with a knowing smile. I drove away feeling better than I had in months. The rest of the trip to Santa Fe was pleasant, and I had a wonderful visit with Margaret. But I kept thinking about the Meadowbrook Inn and the sad, kind people I'd met there. On the drive home, I took a detour to try to find the inn again. I remembered the exit number and the winding road through the hills. But when I reached the area, there was no exit, just endless farmland and an occasional ranch house. I stopped at a gas station and asked the attendant about the Meadowbrook Inn. He'd lived in the area his whole life, he said, and there had never been a hotel anywhere nearby. When I got home, I tried to find information about the inn online. Nothing. No website, no reviews, no historical records. It was like the place had never existed. But I know it did exist, at least for me, at least for that one night when I needed it most. I've made several more trips since then, always taking different routes, always hoping to find the Meadowbrook Inn again. I never have, but I keep looking. Sometimes I think about the other guests I met there, all of us traveling alone, but pretending we weren't. I wonder if they found their way back to the people they loved, or if they're still wandering the highways looking for places that exist only when we need them most. I still miss Harold terribly, but that night at the Meadowbrook Inn taught me something important. I'm not the only one carrying this kind of sadness, and sometimes the kindness of strangers can make the burden feel lighter. Maybe that's what the inn really was. A place where lonely people could find each other, even if only for one night. Story 11. The Photographer's Assignment. I work as a freelance photographer, mostly doing corporate events and weddings, but occasionally I get assignments that are more interesting. Last year, a travel magazine hired me to do a photo essay about quirky roadside attractions in the Southwest. The pay was decent and it meant I could write off a road trip, so I said yes. My route took me through Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Colorado and Utah. I was documenting things like the world's largest ball of twine, dinosaur statues, alien-themed diners, that sort of thing. Kitschy Americana that makes for good magazine spreads. I'd been on the road for about a week and was somewhere in northern New Mexico when I started having car trouble. Nothing major, just the engine running rough and the temperature gauge creeping higher than it should. I'm not much of a mechanic, but I know enough to pull over before things get worse. The problem was I was in the middle of nowhere. High desert country with mesas in the distance and not much else. I hadn't seen a town or even a gas station for at least an hour. I was getting ready to call AA when I saw a sign for lodging at the next exit. Vista Grande Hotel, historic landmark. Photography welcome. The last part caught my attention since I had thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment in my car. The exit led to a narrow road that climbed up into some hills. After about 10 minutes of driving, I came to a small town that looked like it had been frozen in time around 1950. Main street lined with adobe buildings, old-fashioned street lamps, vintage cars parked along the curbs. The Vista Grande Hotel dominated the center of town. It was a 3-story adobe structure with wooden balconies and wrought iron details. Very southwestern, very photogenic. Exactly the kind of place that would make good material for my article. I parked in front and grabbed my camera bag along with my overnight case. The lobby was impressive, with exposed wooden beams, Native American rugs, and vintage furniture that looked authentic rather than reproduction. Behind the front desk was a man in his 60s wearing a white shirt and string tie. He had the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent a lot of time in the desert sun. "Welcome to the Vista Grande," he said. Checking in, I explained about the car trouble and asked if there was a mechanic in town. He assured me there was and that they'd take good care of my vehicle. "We get a lot of photographers here," he said, noticing my camera bag. "The light in this area is spectacular, especially around sunset." He wasn't wrong. Even through the lobby windows, I could see the quality of light was exceptional. Golden and warm with long shadows that would make for dramatic photographs. I registered and paid for one night, though I suspected I might want to stay longer if the car repairs took time. My room was on the second floor with a balcony overlooking the main street. The room was beautifully appointed with handmade furniture and local artwork. But what really caught my attention was the view. From my balcony, I could see the entire town spread out below, with the desert and mountains beyond. It was like looking at a perfectly composed photograph. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking around town with my camera. Every corner offered another interesting shot. The architecture, the light, the way shadows fell across the adobe walls. I shot 3 rolls of film and filled up 2 memory cards. The people I encountered were friendly and didn't seem to mind being photographed. An elderly woman sitting on her porch, a man working on an old truck, children playing in a small park. They all had this timeless quality, like they could have been photographed 50 years ago. Around sunset, I climbed up to a hill overlooking the town to get some wide shots. The light was incredible, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. I shot until it was too dark to see through the viewfinder. Back at the hotel, I had dinner in the restaurant. The food was excellent, traditional New Mexican cuisine with green chile and fresh tortillas. The dining room was full of other guests, all of whom seemed to be photographers like me. I struck up a conversation with a woman at the next table who was shooting with some expensive medium-format equipment. She said she'd been coming to the Vista Grande for years, that it was one of the best-kept secrets in the Southwest for photography. "The light here is different," she said. "More intense, more saturated. You'll see when you develop your film." After dinner, I went back to my room to review the digital images on my laptop. She was right about the light being different. The colors were more vivid than anything I'd shot before, almost surreal in their intensity. I was so excited about the photographs that I stayed up late editing and organizing them. I finally went to bed around 2 a.m., already planning what I'd shoot the next day. I woke up to bright sunlight streaming through the windows. According to my watch, it was almost 10 a.m., which was unusual for me. I'm typically an early riser, especially when I'm traveling for work. I got dressed and went downstairs for breakfast, but the dining room was empty. Not just empty of guests, but completely cleared out. No tables, no chairs, no sign that it had ever been a restaurant. Confused, I went to the front desk to ask about breakfast. There was no one behind the counter, and when I rang the bell, no one came. I walked outside to check on my car and see if the mechanic had looked at it yet. My car was parked where I'd left it, but something was wrong with the town. Half the buildings that had been there the day before were gone. Not demolished, just gone, leaving empty lots with weeds growing through cracked concrete. The vintage cars that had lined the streets were nowhere to be seen. The people I'd photographed were absent. The whole place had an abandoned, desolate feeling that was completely different from the vibrant community I'd documented the day before. I went back to my room to get my camera equipment, thinking I needed to document this bizarre transformation. But when I checked my cameras, all the memory cards were blank. The film I'd shot was still in the cameras, but when I tried to advance the film, it felt like the rolls were empty. Panicking, I checked my laptop. All the digital images I'd edited the night before were gone. Not deleted, just gone, like they'd never existed. I packed my gear and checked out, though there was still no one at the front desk. I left my room key on the counter and got in my car. The engine started immediately and ran perfectly. No sign of the problems I'd had the day before. I drove back to the highway as fast as I dared on that winding road. When I reached the main highway, I pulled over and tried to make sense of what had happened. I looked back toward where the town should be, but I couldn't see anything. Just empty hills and desert. I got out my road atlas and tried to find the exit I'd taken, but there was no town marked in that area. I drove to the next real town and asked at a gas station about the Vista Grand Hotel. The attendant had never heard of it. Neither had anyone else I asked. When I got home, I tried researching the area online. I found some references to ghost towns in that part of New Mexico, places that had been abandoned decades ago when mining operations shut down, but none of them matched what I'd experienced. The most disturbing part was the complete absence of any photographic evidence. I'm a professional photographer. I document everything. But it was like that entire day had been erased from existence. I still have the assignment from the travel magazine, and I've been trying to complete it by visiting other roadside attractions. But I keep thinking about the Vista Grand Hotel and the incredible light I found there. Sometimes I drive back to that area, looking for the exit that led to the town. I've never found it again, but I keep searching. I know what I experienced was real, even if I can't prove it. The strangest thing is that my photography has changed since that trip. The light in my images is different now, more intense and saturated, like what I saw at the Vista Grande. Other photographers have commented on it, asking what new techniques I'm using. I don't know how to explain that I learned something in a place that apparently doesn't exist from people who may never have been real. But the knowledge is there, embedded in my work somehow. Every photograph I take now carries a trace of that impossible light, that perfect moment when everything was exactly as it should be. Maybe that's what the Vista Grande really was. Not a place, but a moment. A brief intersection where photography and reality merged into something beyond both. I'm still looking for it, still hoping to find that exit again. Not for the magazine assignment, but for the chance to understand what I experienced there. And maybe, if I'm lucky, to photograph it one more time. Story 12. The Nurse's Night Shift. Working night shifts at the hospital for 15 years teaches you to expect the unexpected. People die at 3 a.m., babies are born during thunderstorms, and sometimes the human body does things that medical textbooks say are impossible. But what happened to me at the Riverside Inn last month was unlike anything I'd encountered in my medical career. I was driving home to Tulsa after attending a nursing conference in Denver. The conference had run late on Friday, so instead of flying back, I decided to rent a car and drive through the weekend. I enjoy road trips, and after 3 days of seminars and workshops, I was looking forward to some quiet time to process what I'd learned. The drive through Colorado and Kansas was pleasant enough, but by the time I hit Oklahoma, I was getting tired. I'd been on the road for about 8 hours and needed to stop for the night. I was somewhere between Dodge City and Wichita when I started looking for a hotel. Most of the places I passed were either full or looked questionable. It was Saturday night, and apparently there were several events in the area that had booked up the usual chain hotels. I was starting to think I'd have to sleep in the car when I saw a sign for the Riverside Inn. The inn was about 5 miles off the highway, down a 2-lane road that followed a meandering river. It was a charming place, probably built in the 1930s, with white clapboard siding and a wraparound porch. Very quaint, very peaceful looking. The parking lot was about half full, which was encouraging. I parked near the front entrance and went inside to check availability. The lobby was small but welcoming, with comfortable furniture and soft lighting. Behind the front desk was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes. She was wearing scrubs, which immediately caught my attention. "Are you a nurse?" I asked as she was processing my registration. "I am," she said with a smile. Well, I was. I'm retired now, but old habits die hard. I still wear scrubs because they're comfortable. We chatted briefly about nursing while she prepared my room key. She mentioned that they got a lot of healthcare workers at the inn, people traveling between assignments or attending conferences like I was. "Room 18, she said, handing me the key. "Second floor, very quiet. I think you'll sleep well there." The room was lovely, decorated in a country style with handmade quilts and antique furniture. The bathroom was small but clean, and the bed looked incredibly comfortable after 8 hours in a rental car. I unpacked my overnight bag and decided to take a walk around the property before settling in for the night. The inn sat on several acres along the river, with walking paths and benches placed strategically to take advantage of the views. As I was walking, I noticed other guests on the grounds. What struck me was that many of them were wearing medical attire: scrubs, lab coats, stethoscopes around their necks. It was like a medical convention, but more relaxed and informal. I struck up conversations with several people. A doctor from Kansas City who was driving to a new job in Texas, a paramedic from Colorado who was visiting family in Arkansas, a physical therapist from New Mexico who was relocating to Oklahoma, all healthcare workers, all traveling alone, all staying at this charming inn in the middle of nowhere. Around 10 p.m., I went back to my room and tried to settle down for the night. But something was bothering me, though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. As a nurse, you develop instincts about people. You learn to read body language, to notice when something doesn't quite fit. And something about the other guests felt off, though they all seemed perfectly normal on the surface. I was lying in bed trying to identify what was bothering me when I heard voices in the hallway. Quiet conversations, but definitely multiple people moving around. This seemed odd for a small inn at 11 p.m. I got up and looked out the peephole in my door. The hallway was full of people, all wearing medical attire, all walking purposefully in the same direction. They moved with the kind of focused urgency you see in hospitals during emergencies. Curious, I opened my door and stepped into the hallway. One of the people I'd talked to earlier, the paramedic from Colorado, noticed me and smiled. "Sorry if we woke you," he said. "We're just heading downstairs for a consultation." "Consultation?" I asked. "Room 12, he said. "Patient needs our help." Before I could ask what he meant, they were gone, disappearing down the stairs in a group. I stood there for a moment confused. This was an inn, not a hospital. What kind of patient consultation could be happening at 11 p.m. in a hotel room? My nursing instincts kicked in. If someone needed medical help, I should offer to assist. I got dressed and went downstairs to find room 12. The first-floor hallway was empty, but I could hear voices coming from one of the rooms. I knocked on the door of room 12. "Come in," someone called. I opened the door and stepped into what should have been a standard hotel room. Instead, I found myself in what looked like a hospital room. Medical equipment, monitors, IV stands, oxygen tanks, and in the bed was an elderly man who was clearly very ill. The healthcare workers I'd met earlier were gathered around his bed, each performing different medical tasks. The doctor was checking his pulse, the paramedic was adjusting an IV, the physical therapist was monitoring his breathing. "Are you a nurse?" the doctor asked when he saw me. "Yes, but I don't understand. What is this place?" "It needs us," the doctor said simply. "That's why we're here." I approached the bed to assess the patient. He was unconscious, breathing shallowly, with all the signs of someone in the final stages of a terminal illness. His skin was pale and cool, his pulse weak and irregular. Without thinking, I fell into my professional role. I checked his vital signs, adjusted his position to make him more comfortable, monitored his breathing. The other healthcare workers worked alongside me with the kind of seamless coordination you only see among experienced medical teams. We worked for what felt like hours, though time seemed to move strangely in that room. Sometimes the monitors would show improvement, sometimes decline. We adjusted medications, provided comfort measures, monitored his condition continuously. The strange thing was, none of us discussed treatment plans or consulted charts. We all seemed to know instinctively what needed to be done, working together like we'd been a team for years. Around 3 a.m., the man's condition began to deteriorate rapidly. His breathing became labored, his pulse more irregular. We all recognized the signs of someone approaching death. I took his hand and spoke to him softly, the way I always do with dying patients. Even if they're unconscious, I believe they can hear us. The other healthcare workers gathered around the bed, creating a circle of caring presence. The man died peacefully at 3:17 a.m., surrounded by people who had dedicated their lives to helping others. As his breathing stopped, I felt a profound sense of completion, like we had fulfilled some important purpose. After he passed, we all stood there for a moment in respectful silence. Then, without discussion, we began to clean up the medical equipment and restore the room to its original condition. Within minutes, it looked like a normal hotel room again. No medical equipment, no monitors, just standard hotel furniture and decor. The man's body was gone, though I couldn't say when or how it had been removed. The other healthcare workers began to leave, quietly filing out of the room. I was the last to go, turning back for one final look at the space where we'd provided end-of-life care to a stranger. "Thank you," the doctor said as we walked back toward the stairs. needed us, and we were here? I went back to my room and tried to process what had happened. Had I really spent 4 hours providing medical care in a hotel room? Had we really witnessed someone's death and somehow made it disappear? I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my windows. I got dressed and went downstairs to check out, hoping to find some explanation for the night's events. The woman at the front desk was the same retired nurse who'd checked me in, but when I asked her about room 12 and the patient who died there, she gave me a blank look. "Room 12, she said. "That room has been vacant all weekend. We're doing some renovations, so it's not available for guests." I asked about the other healthcare workers I'd met, describing them in detail. She said she remembered checking in a few medical professionals, but they'd all checked out early that morning. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "You look like you didn't sleep well." I assured her I was fine and completed my checkout. As I was loading my luggage into the car, I noticed something in my jacket pocket that hadn't been there before. A small card with a simple message. "Thank you for your service." The drive back to Tulsa was uneventful, but I couldn't stop thinking about the night at the Riverside Inn. Had I really participated in providing end-of-life care to a dying stranger? Or had it all been some kind of vivid dream brought on by exhaustion? When I got home, I tried to research the Riverside Inn online. I found a basic listing with contact information, but no reviews or detailed descriptions. Nothing that would explain what I'd experienced there. I've been a nurse for 15 years, and I've seen people die in hospitals, nursing homes, and private residences. But I've never experienced anything like that night at the Riverside Inn, where healthcare workers from across the region somehow came together to provide comfort to a dying stranger. Maybe it was real, maybe it wasn't. But the experience reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place. To help people, to provide comfort, to be present during life's most difficult moments. And sometimes, when I'm working a particularly difficult night shift at the hospital, I think about that elderly man who died peacefully surrounded by strangers who cared enough to help. Maybe that's what the Riverside Inn really was. A place where healers could fulfill their deepest purpose, even if only for one night.